Oli kord aeg, kus arhitektiga ei vaieldud ja tema otsustes ei kaheldud. Või kui isegi kaheldi, siis puudus meedium nende kahtluste edastamiseks. Täna pruugib vaid mõne keskmise suurema maja püsti löömisest, kui kohe ilmuvad nagu mutid maa alt välja kommentaatorid, kes kipuvad kõike kohe iseteadlikult kommenteerima. Enamasti on need kommentaarid üsna sisutühjad, kuid suhtluskanalite tormiline areng on loonud platvormi ka sisuliste arutelude tekkeks, mistõttu võib tänane arhitektuuritarbija vähemalt teoreetiliselt olla tunduvalt enam eelinformeeritud. Lisaks on rohujuure ja mis iganes muult tasandilt nina välja pistnud linnalaborandid, kollaborandid, utopistid ja muidu aktivistid. See kõik on tekitanud situatsiooni, kus musta pintsakut kandva kõrgekaaluselise sviitriga iseteadliku olekuga arhitektil on aeg moemuuseumisse kolida. Endisel sviitril tuleb täna olla tunduvalt enam avatud ja koostaldim, sest teadmus ja info ei ole täna enam vaid pintsaku käes, vaid infot omavad ka kindad, sallid ja kampsunid. Mida on meil õppida tänase peaesineja kogemusest? Võib-olla seda, kuidas kõnetada laiemat publikut, kuidas vastandlikke huvisid arvestades luua kvaliteetset ja jätkusuutlikku keskkonda. Welcome, Mr. Bjarke Ingels.
Good evening. It's nice to be here in Tallinn, surrounded by architectural models. After the introduction, I have to confess that I'll be showing images of architecture and even images of architecture that has not yet been built, including our proposal for the City Hall here in Tallinn. But I do hope that eventually I can show people around in a real built building. What I'd like to spend the next hour doing is maybe talking a little bit about what can be the potential role of architects in society. What is the role that architecture plays, and what is the role that architects can play? Of course, I come from the architecture office BIG. This is actually the girl who won the best costume at the summer party, where the theme was getting tattoos. So everybody, we had just become an incorporated company, so the theme was big ink. So everybody made tattoos, but Lauren, she went even further. But unlike a tattoo, it actually grew out again. We are roughly 100 people in Copenhagen, and since September 2010, we've been. This is actually our new office in Copenhagen. It's the factory where they used to make Carlsberg beer bottle caps. And it's also probably the one space we could find in Copenhagen that mostly looks like a New York loft. Because since September we're now 70 people in New York. And essentially, if you look at the role of architects, I think architects can actually, like in the work we've done, we've discovered that we can actually fill quite a series of different roles. We like this idea of the architect as being a midwife that isn't so much him or herself giving birth to the city, but is rather assisting society in giving birth to itself. You can also say that the architect is like a curator, because we don't come necessarily with all of the content, the ideas, the inputs, but we somehow help to select them and to accommodate them and put them together. And you can also say that that the architect is almost like a kind of leader, because you can say in management theory, you talk about, and in group psychology, you talk about that the naturally emerging leader is the one in the group who better than anyone else is capable of formulating a shared vision. So a vision that he or she puts forwards that captures the concerns and the demands and the anxieties and the dreams and desires of most people in the group. So you can say, as architects, we hardly have any power. We don't have any political power. We can't decide to build the Thailand town hall, because then it would already be built. We don't have the financial power to pay for it either. But what we do have is that we have the power of our ideas. That if we can actually sort of listen and observe, we can formulate a vision that captures the concerns and criteria and requirements, and turns it into something that can actually inspire other people to choose it and to realize it. And I think one of the things that makes being an architect interesting is that you can say architecture is literally the art and science of making sure that our city and our buildings fit with the way we want to live our lives. So it's not just, designing a pretty facade or pretty pictures or expressive sculptures, but it's a question of sort of designing ecosystems where we channel the flow not only of people, but also of resources through our cities. And one of the reasons for the importance of this sort of expanded role of the architect, you can sense in this image. It was taken at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Copenhagen 3 years ago. And I think if you look at everybody's face, but I think especially Sarkozy, you can see that this wasn't exactly a party. It was a complete failure. None of the goals that were established for the summit were met. And the general discussion about sustainability was drowning in this frequent misconception that sustainability is a question of how much of our current quality of life are we prepared to sacrifice in order to afford being sustainable. So anyway, this Protestant idea that it has to hurt to do good. So when we were invited to do the Danish pavilion for the Shanghai World Expo that was focusing on sustainable cities in 2010, we thought, what if we could look at a different take on sustainability? What if sustainable cities and buildings could actually increase the quality of life and the amount of enjoyment? So we took and made the pavilion like a Danish streetscape, complete with the blue bicycle lanes of Denmark. If I'm not mistaken, I think, was this the Estonian pavilion? Estonia definitely won on color. But we took a Danish streetscape complete with the blue bicycle lanes of Copenhagen and the Copenhagen city bikes, allowing people to feel how fun it is to ride the bike through the city instead of being stuck in a traffic jam or looking for a parking spot. 40% of the Copenhageners commute by bicycle, so they never stuck in traffic. You could also bicycle through the exhibition itself, making it the ideal museum for impatient people, because you could do everything in 3 minutes without missing anything. And our first project, actually, 12 years ago, was the Copenhagen Harbor Bath that extends public life into the water. You don't have to sit in a car for hours to go to the beach. You can just jump in the port in the middle of the city. So we recreated this feeling at the heart of the pavilion. You could actually jump in and feel how clean, if not how cold, Danish water is. And we were thinking, how are we gonna get the Chinese? Because it's fine if we have, if you can come and feel how fun it is to a bicycle or how nice it is to swim in the middle of the city. But if nobody's coming, so we were trying to look for common denominators between China and Denmark. And we discovered that in the Chinese public school curriculum, they have 3 fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen, including the story of the Little Mermaid, the national symbol of Denmark. So we proposed to move the mermaid to China for 6 months. And that caused the Danish National Political Party to try to pass a law specifically against moving the mermaid. So I had to go to Parliament to argue her case. And as you can see, we got her. But then we had to get her through Chinese customs and into the pavilion. We were also thinking this was like an idea about, these expos are about exchanging ideas between cultures. So while she was away, we invited the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei to make an installation. And what he did was that he installed a Chinese surveillance camera in the pavilion. It's the same camera that the Chinese state has installed in front of his studio. But this one was not for the Chinese state. It was transmitting an image to a giant flat screen that he mounted in the water where she normally sits. So when the tourists would go in vain, they would see that she was okay. But also, I think more sort of polemically, for 6 months it became the only loophole in the Great Firewall of China, because it was the only uncensored live TV feed from China to the rest of the world. So this was essentially the first idea that we coined, this idea of hedonistic sustainability, that sustainable cities can actually increase enjoyment. You say like the way we work in our office is that we don't really have any kind of particular stylistic a priori preference. Rather, we try to sort of to work on this idea of knowledge-driven design, that each and every design decision we make is informed by a specific piece of information, some kind of an observation or concern or requirement. And you can say if architecture is a little bit like the art of painting a portrait of someone. So to design a building for someone, like a client, an institution, an organization, is a bit like painting a portrait. Because you can say the beauty of a portrait is of course in the artist's capacity to express him or herself, but perhaps more importantly, it's in the artist's capacity to express the subject. Not only the physical appearance, but also the character, the personality, the aura, if you like, the soul of the subject. So to be successful, it has to be 100% the expression of the artist, as well as the expression of the subject. And in a similar way for architecture, like if you always come in with some kind of preconceived idea, the building will always be more about your stylistic preferences. And instead, if you approach this like portraiture, it becomes a bit like discovering and uncovering the potential of a certain situation. You can say, I do believe that architecture is really at the intersection of art and science, or art and technology. And you can say the art that really interests me is the art that expands your perception of the world, or of life, or society. It could be like a piece of music that captures sounds that you would normally disregard as noise, but suddenly, because of this piece of music, you start hearing the potential for harmony. And it can be like pictures or sculptures or whatever. But the point is that after you've been exposed to the art piece, after you've heard the music, you will no longer be able to hear these sounds without actually hearing the potential for harmony. And in the same way with architecture, once a project has made things manifest that you would otherwise not have noticed, it sort of expands your perception of the world, and it expands your perception of the possibility, what you can actually do with the world and with the city you live in. So I'd like to sort of go through a handful of examples of work we've done and try to highlight what are the aspects that have informed our design decisions. Like one of the first projects we did in Copenhagen was the mountain. And essentially it was 100 apartments and a big parking structure. And we thought instead of having like all these houses looking at the parking, we could turn the apartments into penthouses, put them on top of a podium of cars. You know, if we would sort of lower the southwestern corner, we could actually create a man-made slope. The cars would occupy all of the deep space on the ground, and the apartments would go on top. But instead of being like a vertical stack, suddenly they would become like houses with gardens, but with a penthouse view and in the middle of the city. So it became this sort of a man-made mountain of houses with gardens. You know, you could really live there. Your kids could run out and play when the weather was nice. And all of this is made possible because they're actually sitting on top of the cars. There's a single funicular elevator that gives access to all of the apartments. And the facade is wrapped in a big perforated aluminum facade. We wanted the parking to be naturally ventilated and naturally illuminated. And it's made possible because the holes bring light and air into the structure. But because this is also the main image of the building facing the city, we found out that if we vary the size of the holes, from a distance, the dark holes on the bright aluminum turns into a gigantic artwork for free. We commissioned a Japanese Himalaya photographer who gave us this beautiful photo of Mount Everest. So for 2,000 euros, we could actually create a giant urban artwork. We call this idea of synergy, we call it architectural alchemy, that by actually mixing traditional ingredients like parking and apartments together, we can actually create you know, a mountain of homes that have like gardens and views. And we've taken this idea one step further with the same client, also in Copenhagen at the city limits. This lake is where Copenhagen stops, and then you have a giant park. It's going to be part of a whole new neighborhood that is built along the new subway. And it's really where Copenhagen stops and cows take over. And the main thinking is, how do you build a whole new neighborhood without you know, creating this sort of anonymous modernist suburb that you know from the 60s and 70s? You know, this is 200 by 100 meter city block. It's an entire city block. We thought, you know, why don't we look at the different needs of the different programs? So shops and offices, they like to be close to the customers on the ground. Residential goes on top, but because residential floor plates are less deep than commercial floor plates, suddenly we get space for a little garden and a path in front. Then we add a layer of more traditional apartments and then penthouse townhouses. The master plan dictates a shortcut through the building, so we turn it into a figure 8 with these little plazas. And then also commercial spaces, offices and shops, they like daylight, but they hate sunshine and glare. They spend energy on cooling. So to the south, we sort of lower them to the ground. To the north, we lift them up to become a 4-story office building, at the same time lifting up the apartments into the sun and the view. In reverse, in the southwest corner, we sort of push the corner down, opening up the entire courtyard for the views of the surrounding landscapes. As a result, it becomes this sort of a twisted number 8, where you actually end up getting this path where you can actually sort of walk and bicycle all the way from the ground to the top. So you can say the 8 house is not just an architectural image. It's not a 2-dimensional facade. It's not a sculpture. It's actually a 3-dimensional urban condition that invites the possibility for social life, for spontaneous encounters, for creating a feeling of a community and a neighborhood that is traditionally restricted to occurring on the street, is actually invited to invade the 3-dimensional space of the city block. So you can say the entire the third dimension of the city becomes activated for social potential. Also, Copenhagen is completely flat. We have no hills, no mountains, and now you can actually, if you at the heart of the 8 house, all of the social programs, the amenities that are shared for the house are connected along the moment where the 8 crosses itself, all the way from the ground to the roof. And one of the things we noticed is that, as you can see, this is how flat Copenhagen is, not unlike Tallinn. Not only the people that live in the 8 house go there, but actually people that have nothing to do in this part of town will actually go out here because it's the only place in Copenhagen where you can actually enjoy the view of your city. So I quite often get this sort of objection that this can only be done in sort of a semi-socialist Scandinavia. But recently, like 2.5 years ago, I moved to New York and opened our office in Chelsea, in Manhattan, because we were invited by a Manhattan-based developer to look at a site on the west side of Manhattan. You know, it's an amazing site. It's on the waterfront overlooking the sunset, but it's very far away from Central Park. It's between a waste management facility, a power plant, the West Side Highway. So we thought they really need some kind of an oasis. The neighborhood is called Hell's Kitchen because it's so industrial. So we thought maybe it could be interesting, to take the Copenhagen courtyard. This is the city block where my dad grew up. And you say the Copenhagen courtyard is at the architectural scale, what Central Park is at the urban scale, an oasis in the middle of the city. So we asked ourselves, what happens when you combine the density of a Manhattan skyscraper with the social space of a courtyard, or what could a court scraper look like? So basically we place the courtyard next to the existing buildings. We don't block the view of our neighbor tower. To add the density of a high-rise, we lift the northeast corner up to 500 feet. That still opens up the entire courtyard for the sunlight and the view, creating this sort of striking new silhouette on the Manhattan waterfront. So anyway, you can almost see that it's somehow some of the ideas from the 8 house that has migrated to America and taken on a completely new proportion. So basically, all of the residents have little terraces sunken into the roof. From the east, it almost becomes like a spire. When you enter into the lobby, you can move up to the courtyard. That is like this mini Central Park. It actually has the same proportions as Central Park. It's just 15,000 times smaller. And because of the asymmetry, that it's actually the height of a handrail on one side and the height of a high-rise on the other, you get this a nice view of the Hudson and New Jersey. So in a way, you can say that almost symbolically, the rejuvenation of the Manhattan waterfront that starts turning the piers into parks has almost like jumped over the highway and started like putting a central park into the city fabric itself. We broke ground in November last year, and in 2015 for Christmas, this is what it's going to look like driving up and down the West Side Highway. You can turn the music on. Oh, it's too late almost.
I'm at Brooklyn, now I'm down in Tribeca, right next to the Narrow, but I'll be hood forever. I'm the new Sinatra, and since I made it here, I can make it anywhere. Yeah, they love me everywhere. I used to cop in Harlem, all of my Dominicanos right there up on Broadway. Pulled me back to that McDonald's, took it to my stash spot, 560 State Street. Catch me in the kitchen like a Simmons whipping pastry. Statue of Liberty, long live the World Trade, long live the King, yo. I'm from the Empire State.
These streets will make you feel brand new. Big lights will inspire you. Let's hear it, New York, New York, New York.
So in a way, like you can say, like a major part of how ideas evolve is that, you know, sometimes they migrate in the sense that some of the things that we've sort of discovered in Scandinavia or in Denmark can actually somehow move to America and start having a transformative effect over there. Another example, like of course, when you move from Copenhagen to North America, you start dealing with a completely different density, and I think the project in Manhattan is our first attempt at this. Another example, this is downtown Vancouver. Vancouver has this very dense residential downtown. It's also called Hongcouver, because a lot of Hong Kong Chinese moved there when Hong Kong was going to be given back to central China. Right where, so it's a very dense downtown, where Granville Bridge, the main bridge that arrives to downtown, hits the peninsula. Our client managed to acquire a site that, you know, until now has been left undeveloped, and you can say if to have a dense and walkable city is one of the main drivers of sustainability, that you actually get the more people you have living together, the less energy they consume per inhabitant. So of course this is almost like a part of the city that is lost for the sort of urban realm, and we started looking at you know, all the different problems. You have some setbacks from the streets. You have setbacks from the bridges. Then you have another 30-meter setback because the city wants to ensure that nobody lives and looks straight into the traffic. Then here's a park, and we have a setback because we're not allowed to cast shadows into the park. So finally, we're left with a tiny triangular floor plate. It's only 600 square meters. Actually too small to build. But we were thinking, if this idea about having a 30-meter distance is to ensure the residents that they don't look straight out at the cars, when we get 30 meters up in the air, we can actually come back out and sort of maximize all of the nicest apartments. We have twice as many apartments at the top than at the bottom. So when you sort of when you drive over the bridge, it almost looks as if someone is like pulling a curtain aside, sort of a welcome to Vancouver. Almost like a genie in a bottle coming out of a very dense triangle and becoming like a big building at the top. So it reminded us a little bit of the Flatiron in New York, which is a product of a time in Manhattan real estate history where real estate value, steel structure, and elevators suddenly made a very difficult and small triangle into what is now the landmark and the namesake of a whole neighborhood in Manhattan. Except we almost like take it one step further. We considered calling it the Fat Iron instead, but our client hates the name. And then of course, like part of this is also to create a successful neighborhood underneath the bridge. So we were thinking in Vancouver, it actually rains a lot. So we could try to see if inhabiting the space under the bridges, you have shops, offices, restaurants, could actually become part of the character of the neighborhood. And actually, one of the things in Vancouver, sort of in the legacy of Ian Wallace at the bottom left, they have actually created this very successful contemporary photo art. And we're now working together with Rodney Graham to create a permanent outdoor gallery of light boxes that are suspended under the highway, almost like an industrial urban street version of the 16th Chapel. That, you know, in the good old days, just like in here, paintings actually used to be hanging above you as part of the decoration, and we're trying to sort of recreate this situation on the streets of Vancouver. So again, like you can say, like a radical attempt at repurposing, but also reimagining the image of a neighborhood that has been sort of largely undeveloped because it's, you know, seen as being a difficult place under the bridges, and turning it into something that could be maybe one of the most exciting neighborhoods of Vancouver. A last sort of project in this sort of this idea that when you move to a new place, you really start dealing with typologies that you've never dealt with before. We got invited by a client who took us to see the Space Needle of Seattle. The Seattle was built at the World's Fair in 1962 because he wanted us to do the same. He wanted us to do the same for Phoenix. He had found out that the Space Needle in Seattle, which is essentially a small public exhibition, observation deck, and restaurant, hovering like 150 meters up in the air, that they actually make, it has become the landmark of Seattle, and they make $20 million every year on the elevator. So it's actually a good business, surprisingly. And to make a Space Needle work, you need a city that has no existing landmark. So Phoenix totally complies. And the basic idea, because also when you get up, you actually have the beautiful desert around Phoenix with the mountains, but the architecture itself is not so interesting. So the idea is to make for Phoenix what the Eiffel Tower is for Paris. And we were thinking, like one of the things that strike us, we went to a few of these observation towers, and as you probably know, once you get up there, the experience is actually very two-dimensional. It's like very flat, and you have like a window around. So we thought like one of the most exciting inventions of American architecture is the Guggenheim in uptown New York. This idea that you have like this, you take the elevator up, then you have a spiraling descent where you contemplate a central void, like a very three-dimensional and dynamic spatial experience. So we propose almost to turn the Guggenheim inside out, to organize all of the program from the sort of arrival, observation, exhibition, retail, and restaurant into a continuous loop, almost like a big pin on Google Maps. We have a very small footprint, and then you arrive, and then you gradually descend until the equator, and then to the South Pole, and back down again. So essentially, the elevator rides on the outside, so we can keep the central stem as slim as possible. Then it sort of passes through these holes in the bottom, takes you to the North Pole, where you have a big observation deck outdoor. And then you can gradually descend. The floors cantilever from the central. It's all going to be in situ concrete. But towards the center, we actually have space enough for all of the toilets and the kitchens. So it really looks transparent, even though it has all of the serving functions close to the core in the thickness of the floor plate. And you get this sort of interesting intersection between the dynamic skyline or horizon of the space versus the horizontal skyline of Phoenix. The E.T. moment. And of course, when you're doing a project that is like purely a cultural building for fun in a desert, we started looking a little bit at how could we make it intelligently. So of course, by making it into a globe, we have the best ratio between the exposed surface and the contained volume. The consistent use of cantilevering floors create a lot of self-shade. Because it's all exposed concrete, the thermal mass of the concrete allows us to open up all of the windows at night so that the concrete cools down, and then during the day it radiates cool, so we can minimize the need for air conditioning. At the same time also we have incredibly generous ceiling heights, 20 feet, which is like 6 meters. So we only need to retain a comfort zone at the bottom, and we actually have this sort of thermal rise above the heads of the people. So we don't have to like spend energy on cooling everything above your hands. And then finally, we're right next to the Phoenix Convention Center in a climate where the sun is shining always. So we thought photovoltaics might actually be really interesting. It would be very profitable. And we thought instead of, we need like 30,000 or like 3,000 square meters of photovoltaics, that we could actually like consider putting them in some kind of a artistic way. This is the flag of Phoenix, but it could be anything. That, you know, you'll actually have 700,000 people up in the Space Needle every year that would be able to see this sort of gigantic art piece on the roof of the convention center. And of course, like when you're trying to design what could be the namesake of a neighborhood or an entire city, you have to think about the nicknames. I mean, we like they actually call it the Pin now in Phoenix, which is I think a nice name. They actually call it the Big Pin, which we think is really nice. But also our engineer came up with the Honey Dipper, which I think is still quite charming, actually. So with a little bit of luck, in 3 years, this could be the skyline of Phoenix as you arrive with the airplane. So, you know, a completely different context, a completely different program ends up dictating a completely different sort of architectural response. As you can see, like in a lot of our work, even though it's privately commissioned, it deals a lot with the public and the notion of public participation. You know, and a handful of projects we've really dealt directly with the public element. Our first building in Copenhagen, the Maritime Youth House, which is essentially a social project to let the local kids rig sails and tie knots instead of stealing cars and painting graffiti, is designed like an undulating wooden deck that creates you know, a big informal playground on its roof, inviting for all kinds of spontaneous activities. And of course, here in town, in 2008, we competed to come up with an idea about what could be the building that could be the home of all of the public administration, all of the political elements, and all of the public service of Tallinn. And of course, like building right next to the sort of UNESCO World Heritage medieval downtown of Tallinn, but also right next to the Cultural Cauldron, which is a former factory, and the Linderhallen, which is a Soviet sports facility. So really different scales, really different contexts, really different kinds of urban space. And also like really on the sort of, on the limits between like the contemporary extensions and the historical spires of downtown. And this is the site right next to the elevated plaza on the roof of the Linderhallen. And the main idea is that right now the city hall is still located in many buildings inside the medieval city. And to use this as a way to somehow jump over the green belt of the moat and start bringing public life down to the water. And we thought one of the ideas could be to undo the traditional dichotomy of having the public outside and the politicians inside. So to literally extend the town square to flow through the city hall into this sort of generous, what we call like a public service marketplace, where people can actually go in, meet the public servants, see like public exhibitions, and see the politicians at work. And the main idea is that currently there's like 11 different departments and the city council. So we took the different departments, organized them into different buildings, connected them. Each building is proportioned to the specific program of that department. So they're located to sort of exploit the most ideal adjacencies. And we looked through like a longer process also with the city. We looked at it became almost like this elastic structure that could actually be tweaked and turned and incorporate input and concerns and demands. And gradually we arrived at this sort of what we call the public village, because it has like the porosity and the human scale of the historical city center, but it has all of the benefits of a holistic, integrated public institution. So essentially like one continuous institution. Each department has its own location and its own views to the outside. The roofs are adjusted to the climate of Estonia. And you end up getting this like little, like almost like you have the porosity almost of the medieval downtown, but as a single entity. So these are some of the model photos of the adjusted project. And you can see like in one hand it somehow blends in with the more historical skyline, like with the modern skyline, and sometimes with the more historical skyline. And it's actually sort of rather intimate in scale, even though it is a rather big town hall. So the sort of the different facades, the facade is always drawn back from the overhang of the buildings above, and it creates a series of different squares, something that is like more like a public square, and a series of spaces that are more intimate or street-like or park-like. And essentially you get this sort of difference of shelter from above and shelter from the sides. And this transition from a town square towards something could be more like of a town park that continues down to the water. And actually the bottom of the buildings are just adjusted with the roof of the Linderhallen. Between the buildings you have like these courtyards that are sometimes covered with skylights, sometimes are actual gardens that bring daylight and actually also invite access up through the project. People can actually move through the ground floor as they sort of open and inviting a mixture of exhibitions and restaurants. You have like different meeting rooms for conferences where you can actually meet with the public servants. You have an auditorium. And of course daylight comes down all the way to the space beneath, but also to the workspaces above, and you get these views all across the building. In one place, the citizens of Tallinn are invited to actually walk up all the way to a public terrace. And here you can actually continue all the way to a viewpoint where you can really sort of admire the views of the adjacent historical skyline. The workspaces for the politicians and the public servants are organized with mezzanines to create open connections between the different floors, with abundance of daylight and views to the outside and views to the floors below. And finally, as you can see on this image, like this is the old city hall of Tallinn. That in the master plan, the urban master plan, they actually anticipated, the city had anticipated that there should be somewhat of a spire, sort of to retain this sort of iconicity of a civic building. So we proposed, why don't we put the city council inside the spire? It's going to be the tallest point, so it could also be like an observation deck. So like inside you could actually walk up, looking through this one-way mirror down into the city council and up to the viewpoint. But also the city council gets this incredibly generous space for political reflection. You have a giant mirror above, which means that when the politicians have to make difficult decisions, all they have to do is look up and they get this sort of periscope overview of the city that they're messing with. Here it's actually, we propose that the city hall clock can actually be like a big window that actually frames the skyline of the cathedral itself. And actually from certain views, the table of the city council matches the clock. But of course, as a side effect, when the citizens of Tallinn gather to demonstrate, they get this perfect periscope bird's eye view of the city council. They can see if politicians are sleeping or not there at all, or making dirty deals on their notebooks, or playing Angry Birds on their iPhones. So we call this idea the democratic periscope that combines political overview with public insight. And to our luck, the city council actually liked the idea. And we've spent the last couple of years adapting it to all of the specific feedback we've been getting from the city. And hopefully, I honestly hope that like once the elections are over, that we might be able to realize this building, because it's been sort of a major commitment from our office, and I think it could be like an incredibly unique place for a sort of a proposal for a participatory, democratic public building in a sort of modern society. So if somebody here has the political power or the financial power to realize it, please speak up after the talk. Like speaking about public participation, in one case, it's not just that what we designed was for the public, it was actually designed by the public. We were invited to look at an urban space right next to where our office is in Copenhagen. These are images from outside our office. You might remember that Copenhagen and Denmark had a cartoon crisis where a newspaper asked 10 comic designers to make fun of the Prophet Muhammad, pissing off 1 billion Muslims, including these boys. This is our office in Copenhagen. These boys on the street that all have Islamic background. And around that time, we were invited to look at this urban space that is 1 kilometer long, right next to our office. And it was clear that this project was going to be all about creating a feeling of ownership among the local residents. So this is, you know, I'll only explain one aspect of the project, but essentially you have the red square, where everything is like made with different shades of red and pink. You have the black market, where everything is black. And then you have the black market continues and becomes the green park with these rolling hills and green bicycle lanes. And we were thinking, instead of just plastering this with Danish design, we actually reached out to the local community through political meetings, through social media, Facebook, a website, through ads in the local newspaper, and asked people to nominate elements from their other home country. Because it would be strange if the Danes had done the only nice bench and the only nice street lamp. And the main point is that we don't eat Indian food or Chinese food to be nice to the Chinese. It's because sometimes you really want curry, or you really want noodles, or you just really want the uniqueness of that local food. And the same thing, we didn't propose or place a Moroccan fountain in the middle of Copenhagen to be nice to the Moroccans, but because somebody suggested it. And Morocco has an amazing tradition for architectural water features. So, it sits really nicely as this like play element in the heart of Copenhagen. We found this like outdoor sound system in Jamaica, where you can actually plug your iPhone or your iPod and make a spontaneous outdoor concert. And we always get a lot of complaints, but we made it in such a way that it can never play louder than the legal limits, and it disconnects after 9 p.m. So when people complain, they don't have the right because it's fully legal. And then just like in an art museum, next to the sound system, you actually have a plate that says what it is and where it's from, in the language where it's from, and in Danish. So we have like a Thai boxing arena and different elements from Thailand. We have like this sort of Indian plaything, swings from Iraq, like the whole little outdoor gym from Turkey. If you go to of course, from England, the beautiful cast iron litter boxes, like bollards from Ghana, like colorful and beautiful. You have all kinds of elements for bicycling. We have this like bicycle rack from Finland, colored like rainbows. The sign on the red square is the actual sign from the actual red square. We have like a bus stop from Kazakhstan. It's like way cooler than a typical bus stop in Copenhagen. We have this Ukrainian play elephant. We had to make a copy because the original is from Chernobyl and was radioactive. We have manhole covers from France and Switzerland and Israel. Because of the majority of the immigrants are Islamic background, we chose something from Israel that is indestructible. And we even found palm trees in China that naturally grow in a Danish climate, so I think they could also grow in Estonia. So now we actually have naturally growing, they're called hemp palms in Copenhagen. The octopus is from Japan, and it's like this sort of amazing display of the actual cultural and ethnic diversity of the neighborhood. When you look at the benches, it becomes like a social study of the different nationalities. From Mexico, you have a love seat where you can look the person you're sitting next to into the eyes. From Belgium, a bench where everybody looks away from each other. You have this sort of amazing display of different ways of inhabiting the urban space. Finally, of course, like one of the signifiers that you're in a foreign culture when you're traveling is quite often the advertisement. So as a series of sculptural, colorful lamps, we have neon signs that advertise things you cannot buy in Denmark. So this is obviously from America. Actually, we have Osborne the bull. This is my favorite. It's a dentist from Qatar. And then, of course, like a handful of sort of former Soviet or like communist advertisement. I think the Moscovite was one of the worst cars ever produced. I've never seen one, but that's what they say. And we actually made a small app that when you go there, you can actually hear the stories of who recommended this object, where is it from, and what's the story behind it. And it has proven to become like an incredibly popular and an incredibly sort of welcomed and owned and used urban space. Of course, a project like this one in Copenhagen also deals a lot with national identity. We're doing another project that deals purely, a much smaller project, but that deals purely with national identity. Namely, we got invited to compete to design the National Art Museum of Greenland. Greenland used to be part of the Danish kingdom. The first thing they're doing as an autonomous nation is to do their own national art museum. And it's on the waterfront of Nuuk, this rocky landscape, right next to these social housing projects that have been built by the Danes. And as you can see, they look as if they're built in completely flat Denmark. They completely ignore the topography and the landscape. And what we propose to do is actually to make the smallest possible building that can create a little oasis of a sculptural courtyard within the museum itself. It becomes a perfect circle. But instead of ignoring the topography, we actually follow the topography, so it becomes the landscape that creates the shape of the museum. And by making it this sort of melted ring, we actually open up the interior courtyard to face the water. The curves have been almost like imprinted from the topography of the Greenlandic bedrock. It lifts up to invite people to enter into the museum. You have a Guggenheim-like gallery of paintings that take you to a horizontal series of bigger galleries that have either artificial light or light from the sculpture courtyard. And one of the main points is that as soon as you enter into the melted ring, the melted geometry creates a framed view of the landscape, the fjord, the icebergs, the water, the flora of the Greenlandic nature, the sculptures, both inside and outside. But all of the Danish heritage, all of the social housing has been eliminated from view, and it becomes almost like an oasis of Greenlandicness in a city almost completely built by the Danish government. So almost like this like tiny declaration of independence as the first step in this transformation process. That brings me to the last category of projects that I'd like to show. And it's part of a tendency that we've observed is that it seems to be almost like a law of cities that the infrastructure of the industry of the past gets reinvented as the framework for the cultural and social space of the present. And a typical example, this is a Park City in Utah. It used to be a mining town. This was the Silver King, the biggest building in Park City, where the lifts came down with silver from the mines in the mountains. And basically, when the mines dried out, they reversed the flow and started taking skiers up the mountain instead. Eventually, the Silver King burned down, but still you actually have in downtown a ski lift that goes up. So you can say the plumes of smoke of the mining town became plumes of snow cannons of the ski town. Also, Park City is famous because it's home of the Sundance Film Festival. And also the former gas station has become the Kimball Art Museum. And we were invited to expand the art museum on the neighbor lot. It's right at the heart of the city, right where people arrive from Deer Valley Drive. And we thought we would focus all of the new buildings to keep the existing gas station the way it was. History is quite precious in Americas because they have so little of it in built form. So the idea is that you have like two main galleries, one which is nested into the sloping side, one which is like hovering above and facing people arriving from out of town. So it becomes almost like a friendly building that welcomes people to Park City. It actually has exactly the same size and silhouette as the Coalition Mining building. And we thought, how can we make this integrated into this like mountain town? A lot of the immigrants that went to Park City and Utah were actually Scandinavians, and they brought with them log cabin construction principles that they used for their mining shafts and they used for their architecture. And today it's been refined into like these beautiful silos that you see around in the countryside. The Hogans of the Navajo Indians also use solid timber logs. And finally we discovered that during the mining times, the Pacific Railroad went across the Great Salt Lake. And now today there's a company that extracts the piles. They've been marinated in salt for like decades. So we're proposing to use all of these different elements to actually use like a very traditional vernacular sort of building principle to actually create a rather contemporary form in architecture. The thickness of the logs allows us to make the sort of curvilinear geometry of the turning building. The circulation, the insulation, the structure is all made out of the massive wood. And as you sort of enter in, you'll follow the daylight passing between the two different galleries, a restaurant in the middle that opens to the roof of the existing building. And in a way, you know, the Kimball stands almost as this sort of, this like pivoting point of Park City, the cultural center, in the same way that the Coalition building used to be it for the mining town. Actually, speaking of skiing architecture, actually in Levi in Lapland in Finland, we're actually doing a hotel and apartment complex on the top of the hill, and it's designed again like this idea that, you know, different situations have different criteria. It's designed so that no street, no surface is sloping less than 7%. Which means that you can actually move using only gravity. And the buildings are designed in such a way that you can actually take the central elevator up on the roof in the morning, and then you are actually in the middle of the ski slopes. So we also add like another 30 meters to the vertical elevation of the mountains. Sort of, and another sort of recent example of how you can sort of look at the infrastructure that gets reinvented is a project that we're completing this summer, right next to Hamlet's castle Kronborg, north of Copenhagen. Kronborg became UNESCO World Heritage. It used to have the Maritime Museum inside. They had to kick it out, and they said, why don't you put it inside this old dry dock? We don't have to, we're not using it anymore anyway. But as you can see, the dry dock was full of water. The program of the museum would be twice the size of the dock itself. So it would fill it completely. We thought it could be more beautiful to have the dock almost as a negative architecture. We would have to reinforce the dock either from the inside or from the outside to take the pressure from the surrounding soil. And we thought, like, if we're making new dock walls anyway, why don't we actually leave space enough to have the museum between the new and the old walls? In a way, turning the museum brief inside out. So it becomes like a big void. It also becomes the resolution of the dilemma that UNESCO said that our building had to be completely invisible. We weren't allowed to stick as much as a meter out of the ground to not block the view of the castle. Of course, the museum wanted some kind of architectural landmark that would attract people to go and check it out. And by making it into a void, it sort of combines the need for invisibility with the desire for exposure. So you see the sloping paths on top of the bridges. You have auditoria, exhibition spaces, restaurants that also bring daylight into the building. Even though it's completely underground, it actually has an abundance of daylight and views into the courtyard. So this is from the construction side. You can see it suddenly the hole became a solid in an even bigger void. Because it's on the water, we can actually manufacture all of the bridges in shipyards. So they're actually made in a shipyard and lifted in place. So these are some of the images of the construction site where you have the interplay between the straight lines of the steel structure and the raw texture of the historical concrete walls. The auditorium bridge. We even have structural elements like an anchor chain. In this case, the floor is actually hanging in the bridge above it. So anyway, the entire architecture of the Maritime Museum is created by the industry that it's actually dedicated to, and it opens in July this year. I actually realized preparing this presentation that everything we're doing in Denmark is underground. I don't know what to conclude from that, but this is actually my old high school in Copenhagen. We were asked to do a sports hall for handball that can also be used for exams and parties. And the only place we could put it was actually on the sports fields, but that would eliminate football, and that wouldn't make you win a popularity contest in a high school. So we proposed to actually put the sports hall under the courtyard. And the rules, so it would be almost like a molehill. So this is from the construction site. And we actually got the commission from my old math teacher. And the rules for a handball hall is that you need 4.5 meters on the sides and 8 meters in the middle. So we just use the mathematical formula for a ballistic arch to calculate the curvature of the roof. So it's not really designed by hand. It's really the exact shape that a ball would require to go from 4.5 to 8 meters. And inside you have these glue lamp beams that actually create this rather poetic curvature that is really an imprint of the mathematics and the geometry of the sport itself. So I think all of these ideas that we've been discovering and exploring over the last 12 years have actually accumulated in one project that is the biggest project we've done so far in the company. We were invited by the 10 municipalities of metropolitan Copenhagen to look at a strategy for how to connect the periphery of Copenhagen with a new train line. And our suggestion was that if we want to look at creating holistic perspectives and connections between the periphery, we can't just look at Copenhagen or even just look at Denmark, because right on the other side of the water we have Sweden and the whole urban region already connected by the Øresund Bridge. It actually is the most prosperous region in the area. And if we would add a single 5-kilometer long bridge, we could actually turn it into a single metropolitan loop where no place is further away than 40 minutes by public transportation. We combine all of the most active businesses in the area. And by making a bi-national master plan, we can also introduce pink in a Scandinavian flag for the first time. And it actually has the same size as the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's actually a known entity in terms of urbanism. And the idea is that it's not just an infrastructure for trains and for cars. It's also a waste management system, a water management system, a park management system, a smart grid that combines the hydroelectricity of Sweden with the wind power of Denmark. And the idea is that all of the different infrastructural investments are always integrated So urban densification coincides with the elevated train. The train and all of the different elements are integrated with culture, education, and urban densification. And just to show you an example that this is not just some kind of utopian master plan, but is really something that is happening. We're doing a big project as part of the Loop City, which might be the landmark of Copenhagen in the future. It's right next to, this is downtown Copenhagen, the opera, the Royal Theatre. But it's not an opera and it's not a palace. It's actually a power plant that turns trash into electricity and heating. As a resource, a ton of trash is almost the same as 2 barrels of oil. And of course, these power plants have to be in the middle of the city, so they have to be where the distribution grid is and where the waste is created. But they're like big, ugly boxes that cast shadows on the neighbors and block the views. This is going to be the tallest and biggest building in all of Copenhagen. It's going to be right next to the Copenhagen Marina and right next to where the local boys go water skiing. And speaking of skiing, we're really thinking like, how can we make this not just another big box on the skyline, but how can we actually make it contribute to the local community? Danes actually love to ski. We have snow. We had 6 months with snow this winter, terribly. But we have absolutely no mountains. But we do have mountains of trash, apparently. People happily go 6 hours by bus to Branäs in Sweden. Because of the magnitude of this complex, we can do 2/3 of Branäs on the roof of our building. It's a vertical drop of 100 meters. We know exactly how big the power plant and the machinery has to be. There's a single elevator that takes you to a green, a blue ski slope. So miraculously, we won the competition based on this idea. So from 2017, you're going to have to look out for Danish competitors in alpine skiing, because now we can actually practice at home. The facade itself is made as these giant prefabricated aluminum planters that are structure, but also integrate a kind of natural sun screening, allowing a lot of daylight and natural ventilation to enter the workspaces of the power plant. So you can say, like, in many ways, the initial diagram, or the sort of ambition of trying to design cities and buildings as man-made ecosystems, is quite close to being complete here, because not only do we locally harvest the local resources, the roof, the facades, we use like daylight, we use the chimney effect of natural ventilation, but also together with the city of Copenhagen, we form almost like an urban metabolism that turns waste into energy. And this is actually going to be the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. So the smoke that comes out of the chimney is going to be completely non-toxic. That's also why you can actually ski on the roof, because there's no contamination. But it will still contain a little bit of CO2. Not much, but still some, much less than any existing power plant. So there was part of the budget was reserved for an art project. And we decided, we worked with Realities United to work with the resources that we have. So we designed the chimney in such a way that the mouth of the chimney fills up with CO2. And when there's 200 kilos of CO2, it compresses and puffs a gigantic smoke ring. And of course, like on one hand, it's like the ultimate expression of hedonistic sustainability, that what used to be poisonous becomes playful. But also, like, one of the main drivers of behavioral change is knowledge, that if people don't know, they can't act. Understanding always comes before action. And nobody knows what a ton of CO2 is, because it's like too abstract and ephemeral. But if you come to Copenhagen in 2017, and you look at the sky, all you have to do is count the smoke rings, And when you counted 5 smoke rings, we have just emitted 1 ton of CO2. So I like this idea of, like, when you're speaking about knowledge-driven design, that one way of sort of empowering people for action and empowering designers and architects for action is to actually turn the abstract concrete and to turn the sort of the difficult and ephemeral into something specific and tangible. And by projecting the carbon emissions of Copenhagen onto the Copenhagen skies, it makes information available that could eventually inform not only people's design decisions, but also their political choices when they have to act. So with the smoke rings of Copenhagen, I'd like to open the floor for conversation, if there's still energy left in the room.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very inspiring speech. The questions around now. May I ask first by myself, what is your favorite bicycle brand?
Biomega, actually, the Danish brand.
All right.
But I have a very recent affinity for Salut.
All right, okay. I know that. Okay, nüüd küsimused saalist.
Maybe I would begin. Thank you for the fascinating lecture. In several of your interviews, you have recently said that it is important to involve public in design process, but at the same time, you have clearly indicated that you prefer the situation where design itself is kind of held to the professionals themselves. How would you describe on this kind of contradictory claim that you are very interested in public opinion and reaching a larger public, but at the same time you stress that architecture in their specific design process should be the thing of the architects?
I mean, I think, I don't know if I've said that exactly that way, but let me try to rephrase it. I think you become a better opera singer by singing and studying opera. And in the same way, I think you become a better architect by studying architecture, learning a lot about architecture. And in that sense, I think the role of architects is to actually consolidate input and actually assist people that have spent their lives studying medicine or delivering mail or archiving, and to assist them in transforming their demands, their desires, their concerns, their requirements into sort of urban or architectural proposals. So I think as architects, we never built for ourselves, but what we do is we actually try to help society advance itself. So in that sense, I think it's and I think it's a condition that we never do it alone. We always we quite often work with other architects. We quite often work with engineers, with politicians and city planners and local user groups, the future tenants. So in that sense, but it's really this like significant process of translating other people's concerns and demands and dreams into physical form.
Thank you. Maybe we would now give the possibility for the larger audience to ask Bjarke about his ideas and lectures. We have several microphones here. One is on the other side and one is here. Anybody?
Estonia is a shy nation.
Maybe a hungry nation.
Maybe.
Bon appetit.
Hi, Bjarke again. I'm looking at your buildings and the materials you usually use. We can see very much concrete there, but concrete is not a very sustainable material. How you combine, what is the future's material by your opinion?
Actually, which project did you see concrete in? Which one? But mention one. But it's like none of them are actually. But I mean, of course. Sorry. The pin exactly. But actually, I mean, it's funny that concrete is. I think again that's like almost like a necessary requirement. 'Cause I mean, I think when people say concrete architecture, they mean maybe sort of Soviet housing projects or something like that. But quite often it has nothing to do with the material itself. It has to do with either the way it's used, and quite often when people say concrete, they actually mean buildings that are made out of brick. But when they think brick, they think about old buildings that are charming because like immense resources has been spent by having craftsmen or making all kinds of ornamentation, so they seem old and charming. So I think it's not a question of, I mean, we would love to work much more with concrete, but actually none of the buildings you saw are actually finished with concrete. But it also has to do with, in Denmark, in situ concrete is very expensive because it requires a lot of working hours. So and salaries are very high in Denmark, so we haven't been able to work with it. But I think each material has a lot of potential. And I think when you say concrete architecture, you mean a specific kind of architecture that has been done with very little care for instance, the space between the buildings, or with the diversity, or with exploiting different possibilities for creating a variation or like an animated environment. And you think about maybe some kind of Soviet or modernist style of apartment slabs. But I think it's totally unfair to put it down on concrete. It's a figure of speech. It's not there's nothing bad about concrete. The Romans built a lot of their buildings with concrete, and you would never like criticize Rome for being, boring.
Where do you take your pauses or holidays to reload ideas? Just where do you move when you are off sort of duty?
I spent Easter in Jamaica. I went and saw Bob Marley's grave, actually. I mean, actually, it's going to be a random answer, but I think at least once a year I try to go and do something a little bit outside civilization, because I do travel quite a bit, and I always end up going to cities where you can go to a museum, or you can go out, you can eat or drink, basically. But when you go outside civilization, like last summer, I spent 2 weeks climbing Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. And this November, me and some friends are going to be biking from Buenos Aires across the Pampas, over the Andes, and down to Valparaiso. So from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And of course, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take 2 weeks. But when you do something like slower, it actually also allows you to experience the landscape around you in a different way, and it by actually investing with your legs into the journey, it also transforms you in a real way, that you actually come out of it as a slightly different person. And it's quite rare that you have the luxury to spend so much time doing just one thing. So I think more and more, at least like once a year, me and a group of friends are doing this like old school adventure of getting from somewhere to somewhere.
Okay, thank you, Hans. So everyone can go to eat now. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Tänud ka Arhitektuurikeskusele selle suurepärase ürituse organiseerimise eest ja tänud publikule. Kohtumiseni, nägemist!